Hello and good day, esteemed citizens of the world. My name is Angela and I'm the leader of a group known as Les Amis de l'Avocé. Today's video is not part of a scheduled round. Instead, we've taken it upon ourselves, I've taken it upon myself, to address a topic you may have already seen on your dashes and your news feeds. And that's the current crisis in the Ukraine. Though I'd like to jump right in, please bear with a few disclaimers before we start. Firstly, be aware that my awareness of the happenings in Ukraine is the direct result of copious but all recently accumulated research on the subject. I'm not a Ukrainian citizen and do not and cannot represent the personal experience of anyone involved. For transparency reasons, all resources are listed in the description, as well as a myriad of helpful links for anyone looking to do research of their own. Second, let it be noted now that by necessity, describing the events in the Ukraine requires mentions of violence, injury, death, torture and riots. If you're sensitive to discussion of these topics, please consider the risk before continuing. Third, I want to stress that Les Amis de l'Avocé as an organisation do not promote needless violence, and any in reaction to this information is attributed to the personal autonomy of the viewer or viewers responsible. We do, however, promote awareness, analysis and action. In these respects, consider us happy to have served as an inspiration. Now, with that said, assuming you're still with me, it's time to go ahead and tackle the question. So, what's going on in the Ukraine? For those who don't know, the Ukraine is a large but economically suffering country in Eastern Europe. To combat its debt, the government has for the past few years been leading into a planned trade pact with the EU. The key to this agreement is the signature of Ukrainian President Victor Yanukovych. About 2 months ago, however, Yanukovych suddenly turned his back on the deal, refusing to sign. This spurning prompted immediate outrage. Now, on November the 21st, in response to the announcement, hundreds of thousands of Ukraine citizens rushed to the streets in protest, calling for the signature. The protesters flocked to the heart of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, and took up occupation of the city's central Independence Square, or Maidan. Since then, the demonstrations have only escalated, and for the past 2 and some months, the country has been in a state of unrest, with no resolution in sight. With the shift into the new year, clashes with police and protesters have shifted into increasingly violent riots, and last week the struggle leapt to international attention when on January the 22nd, police opened fire into the crowd. 4 protesters were counted dead, and upheaval is at a critical high. There is more to this uprising, however, than a spurned trade deal. Understanding it starts once again with President Yanukovych. After being caught committing wide-scale voting fraud in the presidential race of 2004, Yanukovych still recovered to collect a legitimate victory just 6 years later in the election of 2010. His opponent, Yulia Tymoshenko, however, refused to recognise the win, demanding that the results be discounted. Nevertheless, her opposition was quashed, and with Yanukovych on the seat, she was soon exiled to prison for what was cited as a bad gas deal, effectively silencing any obstacle to Yanukovych's reign. The more valuable gain for Yanukovych, though, came with the organisational overhaul of the entire Ukrainian governmental structure. Ukraine had functioned as a parliamentary republic, but was soon reborn as a presidential system with Yanukovych at the centre. The tax agencies, prosecutors, courts, and any other structures of power became directly subordinate to his control, and a close though unofficial circle of appointed officials nicknamed the family came to share collective control of the top profiting sectors of the Ukrainian economy. Beyond restructuring power, Yanukovych also acquired effective command of the media industry in the Ukraine. Printing presses were either monopolized or oligarchically brought up, and central TV channels yielded to authoritative pressure by only airing news non-critical of the president's reign. The system effectively was, and is, under Yanukovych's thumb, and the citizens subject to his control. Jumping ahead once again to the uprising in November, the reactions to the eventual EU trade spurn must then be seen as having an additional significance. While the movement was a way to protest a move towards Russia instead of the European Union, it was simultaneously a way to express resistance of the corrupt government that would choose Putin's money over its own people. This is, as they've entitled themselves, Euromaidan. So, knowing better how this all started, the question becomes, How did this justified resistance become something that now resembles, quite frankly, and you can see this for yourself in some of the astonishing images in circulation of the riots, what is now an apocalyptic war zone? Here comes the part where we talk about tyranny and violence. On November 30th, not 10 days after the start of the protests, a peaceful student demonstration was, quote, violently dispersed by the Burqa, a corps of special force troops belonging to the Ministry of Interior. In December, despite weeks of anti-government protests, President Yanukovych accepted a deal with Vladimir Putin of Russia, signing into a massive bailout that vastly cheapened gas. On January 16th, lawmakers passed a series of drastic anti-protest laws. These laws, in brief, circumscribed the right of public assembly, criminalised participation in demonstrations deemed violent, punished any criticism of the government, classified non-governmental organisations as foreign agencies, prohibited helmet and mask wearing at rallies, restricted the presence of tents and sound equipment, required authorization for more than 5 vehicles in a convoy, and enforced egregiously disproportionate prison sentences for each new so-called crime. 3 days following, on Sunday the 19th, a violent confrontation between police and protesters occurred, with detainment numbers had already exceeded 70. On Tuesday, cell phones in the area are lit with identical, anonymously broadcasted messages identifying the recipients as participants in a mass disturbance. The next day, January 22nd, at least 3 protesters were shot dead by armed riot police, and Dmitry Bolatov, an activist leader, disappeared. The same Friday, Yanukovych signed an act legalizing the sentencing of any individual without requiring their presence in court. Last week, on the night of the 29th of January, 20 vehicles registered to Euromaidan activists were burnt in verified acts of arson. A few days ago, Dmitry Bolatov reappeared, severely injured and missing part of an ear. He recounted being taken to and held in a dark room, nailed to the door by his hands, tortured and beaten for days. As of Friday the 31st, 33 protest participants remain missing. 13 recorded and dozens more reported instances of targeted violence of police against journalists or emergency workers exist. Injured victims number greater than 300. Hundreds of others have been arrested, and one Euromaidan site reports up to 6 dead. In the middle of last week, the President, a government working group, and 3 leaders of the opposition conferred in hopes of negotiation. No settlement was reached. Following the meeting, the President swiftly declared sick leave, though on Friday a bill was announced repealing several of the recent anti-protest laws. An amnesty agreement was also offered to peaceful protesters, provided they uninhabit the occupied areas. It was staunchly turned down. As we speak, the resistance in Maidan persists. While the Euromaidan demonstrators remain, the options for Yanukovych and Ukraine are limited. Unless and until the government is surrendered, the people have expressed in no uncertain terms that the clashes and the battles will continue. As forces come to a head, the point of change, peaceful or bloody, could be reached soon. For now, though, chaos still reigns. Our statement on the matter is this: as long as civilian peoples are being subjected to abuse and suppression by authorities, and so long as their rights continue to be endangered by others, we are committed to supporting their safety and survival. Until this ends, that is the case. And until this does end, we urge you and all who are capable to do the same. Though most of our viewers are outside of or very far away from the Ukraine, there are still some ways in which you can help. With some research, we've done you the favour of compiling some of these possibilities for you, with links to the relevant pages listed in the description. If you can spare the funds, why not donate your financial support to the independent reporters covering the demonstrations, to the United Ukrainian American Relief Committee, if in the US, or Ukrainian Canadian Social Services in Canada, or to Euromaidan's GoFundMe page for funding medical expenses. There is also a website through which you can purchase and deliver grocery items to the protesters occupying Independence Square. If you'd rather use your metaphorical pen as a weapon, the International Federation of Journalists ask for letters to send to the Ukrainian government to appeal to a stop to the targeting of journalists in Ukraine. And citizens worldwide are encouraged to write to their representatives foreign affairs ministers and government authorities to demand sanctions against the Ukrainian president and his officials. If, like Kufarak and many of Les Amis, you are apt on the social media, use provided signs or the dedicated channels of the IFJ and the EFJ to spread awareness of the crisis. Overall, the largest outcry has been this: people need to know. Whether with our research or your own, you can help expose the criminal assault on human rights that is happening now in Kiev and all Ukraine. As I wrap this up, I heavily advocate the individual investigations of anyone watching this. Should any of our information be found inaccurate, please do not hesitate to share a correction. It's not the intention of Les Amis or this video to incite, but to educate and inform. And it's our deepest hope that we have succeeded to frame and explain a deeply urgent issue in a way that can result in achieving some good. And on our end, well, our thoughts and support go to the protesters, wearied and warrior alike, in hope for their well-being and imminent peace. That's all from me. Thank you for watching.